be a boss before his fiancée, saving him from a deadly
What do you
betrayal.
think you're doing? Get your hands
She
off
grabbed
me,
his
tramp!
face with both hands
Ma'am,
and
please
kissed him.
stop it!
Full, desperate, in front of his fiancée, in front of his bodyguards, in front of every diner on that candlelit terrace overlooking the Mediterranean. The most powerful man in Sicily went still beneath her lips. His fiancée's wine glass shattered against stone. Bodyguards surged forward. Someone shouted. But the waitress didn't pull back. She pressed closer and whispered 3 words against his mouth that turned his blood to ice. The wine is poisoned. A waitress just kissed the most dangerous man in Sicily in front of the woman wearing his ring. And what she whispered is about subscribe and stay, because this story is about to burn everything down. 2 hours earlier, the terrace at Terrazza del Mare was being dressed for a private engagement dinner. White linen, candlelight, jasmine climbing the stone balustrade. The kind of evening that looked like love from a distance and smelled like strategy up close. Giada Ferrara moved between tables with practiced invisibility. 26 years old, 7 years at Terrazza del Mare, one of Taormina's most exclusive cliffside restaurants, where a single bottle of wine cost more than she earned in a week. She'd been on her feet since noon. Her shoulders ached. Her shoes were held together by determination that worked better than glue. 6 nights a week at the restaurant, catering shifts on Sundays. Every euro spoken for before it touched her hand. Rent, the medical debt her grandmother Lucia's illness left behind, and university payments for her younger cousin Elena studying medicine in Catania because someone in the Ferrara family was going to become something, and Giada decided it would be Elena, even if funding it broke her back. Lucia had run a trattoria in the old quarter for 40 years, taught Giada that food was love made visible, and a woman who could feed people would never be powerless. She died with flour under her fingernails, and a recipe book Giada kept on her nightstand like scripture. The trattoria had been shuttered since, debts too heavy, memories too sharp. Giada didn't complain. Ferrara women didn't complain. They showed up and survived and kept moving until the world got out of their way or learned to keep up. Tonight, the upper terrace belonged to Marcello Falcone. In public, olive oil exports, vineyard holdings, maritime investments. In private, the head of Sicily's oldest and most powerful crime family. An organization controlling everything from Catania's ports to Palermo's political machinery. 37. Precise. The kind of man whose silence rearranged entire rooms. Half the island owed him. The other half knew better than to test what happened when debts went unpaid. His fiancée sat beside him, Renata Colonna, daughter of Palermo's most connected political family. Beautiful the way marble is beautiful, flawless on the surface and cold underneath. Their engagement wasn't romance, it was architecture. Renata's family provided political protection and legitimate access. Marcello got government contracts and insulation from prosecution. Renata got the power her family's declining influence could no longer sustain alone. Giada was assigned to the private terrace. She knew the rules. Be invisible. Be precise. Exist only as the hands carrying plates in the silence between courses. She served the first course, burrata with blood orange. As she placed Marcello's plate, her fingers brushed his hand. An accident measured in milliseconds. He looked up. Not through her the way powerful men looked through staff. At her. 1 second of contact that landed somewhere behind Giada's ribs before she buried it and moved on. Feelings like that didn't belong to women carrying trays. Renata commanded the table with rehearsed precision, touching Marcello's arm at calculated intervals, laughing at the right volume, performing devotion for the small audience of his closest associates. Giada had served enough powerful couples to recognize the difference between a woman in love and a woman in costume. During the second course, she saw it. While clearing Renata's plate, Giada caught movement beneath the table. Renata's hand passing a small glass vial to the private sommelier, no larger than a perfume sample. The sommelier palmed it and disappeared toward the wine cellar. The exchange took 2 seconds. Nobody else saw, but Giada did. Because invisible women see everything that visible women assume is hidden. Her grandmother's voice spoke from that place in her chest where Lucia still lived. When something feels wrong in your gut, figlia mia, your gut is almost always right. Giada found an excuse to visit the cellar, told the kitchen she needed a replacement bottle for a corked Barolo. She descended the stone steps and stopped at the doorway. The sommelier stood with his back to her, adding drops from the vial into a crystal decanter of Nero d'Avola, Marcello's wine, reserved for the final toast. She recognized the sommelier, a special request from the fiancé's people. Giada backed out before he turned. Her pulse hammered so hard she felt it in her wrists. She pressed herself against the corridor wall and forced herself to think. She couldn't reach Marcello's security, trained to treat staff like furniture. Couldn't alert the manager. He'd fumble it or tip off Renata. Couldn't cause a scene. Renata would shut it down and the sommelier would vanish before anyone asked the right questions. Couldn't call police. They'd laugh a waitress out before she finished the first sentence. The toast was 15 minutes away. 15 minutes before the most powerful man in Sicily raised a glass of poisoned wine at his own engagement dinner and drank to a future his fiancée had already sold to the people who wanted him dead. Giada stood in the corridor between kitchen and terrace. Service moved around her, plates coming, plates going. The machinery of an evening designed to celebrate a love that was actually a murder weapon. She thought about walking away, finishing her shift, going home to Lucia's recipe book and Elena's tuition bills, and the quiet apartment where nobody asked her to be anything other than exhausted. Then Lucia's voice, steady and Sicilian and immovable as the volcanic rock this island was built on. When you see something wrong and do nothing, you become part of the wrong. Giada straightened her apron, smoothed her hair, and walked back toward the terrace carrying the most dangerous decision she would ever make. Giada calculated while she walked. The sommelier was preparing the decanter, 12 minutes until the toast. Every option she'd already rejected stayed rejected. Security wouldn't listen, the manager would fumble it, a scene would alert Renata, and the evidence would vanish. She needed to reach Marcello directly. Close enough that only he could hear. Close enough that the sommelier couldn't react. Close enough that Renata wouldn't have time to intervene before the message landed. The only moment that would work was the toast itself, when every eye was on the glasses being raised, and Renata's attention was locked on performing the moment. One window, maybe 4 seconds between the pour and the first sip. She needed something that would override his reflexes, stop his hand before the glass touched his lips, keep him close enough to hear a whisper. Something so unexpected that every person on that terrace would be too stunned to move for the 3 seconds she needed. The answer was insane. Lucia would have crossed herself twice and poured limoncello. But Lucia wasn't here. And the man sitting 20 feet away had 11 minutes left if Giada played it safe. She wasn't going to play it safe. While she waited, her mind assembled details she'd filed away without understanding them. Renata had visited Terrazza del Mare 3 times in the past month without Marcello. Always the private garden table. Always meeting the same man, older, silver-haired, cold eyes that priced everything they touched. Giada had assumed he was family, a lawyer, political business. Now she understood. Those meetings were operational. Renata had been sitting across from someone connected to the Ferretti organization, the rival family that had been positioning against Marcello's territory for years. Everyone in Sicily knew the Ferretti name. Everyone knew the tension. Nobody knew that Marcello's own fiancée was the bridge between his empire and the people trying to bury it. The sommelier emerged from the cellar carrying the decanter like a man carrying sacrament. He set it on the service station beside Marcello's table, adjusted the glasses, positioned everything with rehearsed precision. The choreography of an assassination dressed as celebration. Renata's hand rested on Marcello's arm, light, possessive, performed. She glanced at the sommelier. The briefest flicker passed between them. Confirmation. The pour began. Renata's glass first, clean, then Marcello's. Nero d'Avola catching candlelight as it filled the crystal. Deep red, beautiful. Renata raised her glass. To us, to everything we're building together. Marcello's fingers closed around the stem. Giada moved. 4 strides across the terrace, faster than thought, faster than security could process a waitress moving with purpose instead of deference. She took Marcello Falcone's face in both hands and pressed her mouth to his. The terrace detonated. Renata's glass shattered on stone. A bodyguard lunged. Someone at the far table knocked their chair into the balustrade. The sommelier froze with the decanter suspended midair. Giada held on, her lips against his body rigid beneath her hands. She whispered, barely a breath, just enough for the space between 2 mouths. The wine is poisoned. Your fiancé paid the sommelier. I saw the vial. Marcello went still. Not confusion. The stillness of a man whose survival instincts had just overridden every system in his body. His hand that had been rising to push her away stopped. His eyes found hers, inches apart. He read her face the way men in his position read everything. Fast, precise, searching for the lie. He didn't find one. He set the glass down. His hand wrapped around her wrist, not rough, firm, and pulled her behind him. Then he turned to the sommelier already backing toward the kitchen. Bring me the decanter. No volume. Something worse. Absolute certainty. The sommelier bolted. Made it 6 steps before 2 of Marcello's men caught him at the stairs. They brought him back without gentleness. Renata was on her feet. The performance shifted. Outraged fiancé now. She assaulted you. She's clearly unstable. Have her removed. Have her arrested. This is a desperate waitress throwing herself at... Sit down, Renata. 3 words without heat. Renata's mouth closed. Not because she chose to stop, because something in Marcello's voice had moved past the territory where performance could reach. He looked at the decanter, then at Renata, then at Giada standing behind him with her heart trying to escape her ribs. Nobody leaves this terrace. His voice addressed the entire gathering. Associates shifted, bodyguards sealed exits. The string quartet stopped mid-measure. We have a long night ahead. He sent the decanter to his personal physician, a man who'd been on call at every significant gathering since Marcello took over the family. 15 minutes later, the results returned. Concentrated oleander extract, tasteless in red wine, fatal within 2 hours, designed to mimic cardiac arrest in a standard autopsy. Marcello absorbed the information without expression. Then he turned to Giada. How did you know? She told him. The vial passed beneath the table. The private garden meetings between Renata and the silver-haired man. Marcello's people moved on the sommelier. He broke within the hour. Not from violence, but from understanding that the alternative was worse. Renata hired him through a Ferretti contact. The oleander came from the silver-haired handler. The plan? Marcello dies at his own engagement dinner. Renata inherits operational access through the legal framework of the marriage. The Ferretti family absorbs his territory within months. The sommelier's confession hit the terrace like a detonation without sound. Renata pivoted. Denial to justification to threats. Her family would retaliate. Political protection would evaporate. He needed her more than she needed him. Marcello listened to every word, then slid the engagement ring across the table toward her. You overestimated your value. While chaos consumed the terrace, Giada sat in the kitchen corridor with her back against cool stone and her hands still shaking. The kiss was still on her lips. It was supposed to be tactical, a mechanism to deliver a warning. It wasn't supposed to feel like anything. But the way Marcello looked at her after, not with suspicion, not with calculation, but with something she'd never seen directed at a woman in her position. That was sitting in her chest and refusing to leave. Footsteps in the corridor. Marcello appeared. He didn't stand over her. He sat on the floor beside her, shoulder to shoulder against the wall, silent for a long time. You could have walked away, he said. Let it happen. Nobody would have known you saw anything. I would have known. He studied her face, the way he'd studied it with her lips on his, like he was trying to understand something that didn't fit any category he'd built for the world. My grandmother used to say, when you see wrong and do nothing, you become part of it. Giada paused. She also would have said kissing a Don in front of his fiancée was certifiably insane. Marcello almost smiled, the closest thing to a crack in his composure anyone had witnessed in years. He stood, offered his hand. She took it. Their fingers met, and neither pulled away immediately. After tonight, Renata's people will know what happened. This restaurant won't be safe for you. My estate is secure. I can protect you until this settles. He paused. The choice is yours. Giada looked at his hand, still holding hers. I'm a waitress who just kissed a Don in front of 400 euros worth of shattered wine glass. I think we're past safe choices. Marcello's estate sat high above Taormina on a cliff that looked like God had carved it specifically so one man could watch the entire coastline and know it belonged to him. Stone walls, centuries old, lemon trees lining the drive. The kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was guarded. Giada had been there for 3 days. 3 days of waking up in a room with ceilings higher than her entire apartment, eating meals prepared by a cook named Bettina who treated underfed women like a personal offense, and trying to understand how a kiss delivered in 4 seconds had rearranged every coordinate of her life. Renata had been removed from the terrace that night under escort. Not arrested, released into the custody of her family's lawyers, with the understanding that Marcello's patience had a shelf life and she was rapidly approaching its expiration. The Ferretti family had gone quiet, the dangerous kind of quiet that meant recalculation, not retreat. Marcello's people were monitoring every port, every road, every private airfield on the island. Waiting. Giada wasn't waiting. She was restless in a way that expensive sheets and cliffside views couldn't fix. She'd spent her entire adult life in motion, serving, cleaning, calculating, surviving. Stillness felt like drowning in slow motion. On the 3rd morning, she found the estate's kitchen. Not the formal one where Bettina ruled, a smaller one tucked behind the courtyard. Dusty, neglected. A wood-fired oven that hadn't been lit in years. Cast iron pans hanging from hooks with a film of disuse coating their surfaces. She lit the oven, found flour, eggs, olive oil, and San Marzano tomatoes in the pantry. By noon, the kitchen smelled like Lucia's trattoria. Slow-cooked tomatoes, fresh basil, dough rising on a wooden board dusted with semolina. Marcello found her there. He stood in the doorway watching her knead pasta with the kind of focus most people reserved for things that actually mattered. Flour on her forearms, hair tied back with a kitchen cloth, completely absorbed. You commandeered my kitchen. Your kitchen was dying of neglect. I performed a rescue. He almost smiled again. That same crack in the composure, barely visible, gone before it fully formed. But there, she was learning to watch for it. He sat at the small table in the corner, didn't ask what she was making, didn't perform interest. Just sat, present in a way that took up less space than his reputation suggested was possible. Renata's family made contact this morning, he said. They're claiming she was coerced by the Ferretti organization, that she's a victim in all of this. Is she? She sat across from the man who wanted me dead 3 separate times and handed over operational details that would have gotten my people killed. That's not coercion. That's commerce. Giada rolled the pasta thinner. What happens now? The Council of Families meets in 4 days. The evidence will be presented. Renata's recordings, the sommelier's testimony, the toxicology results. The Ferretti family will answer for the attempt. And Renata? Marcello was quiet for a moment. The council will decide. Giada placed the pasta sheets in the drying rack and turned to face him. You already know what they'll decide. You've known since the terrace. His eyes met hers. The calculation was still there. It never fully left. But underneath it, something else had taken residence since the night she'd pressed her mouth to his and whispered 3 words that saved his life. Something that looked like the beginning of trust in a man who'd built his entire world on the assumption that trust was a liability. "You see too much," he said. "Invisible women always do." Over the following days, Giada learned the architecture of Marcello's world, not because he taught her, but because she paid attention. The men who came and went from the estate spoke in codes she couldn't crack, but tones she could read. Tense meant Ferretti movement. Relaxed meant territory secured. The phone calls Marcello took in his study lasted either 30 seconds or 3 hours, nothing in between. The short ones were orders, the long ones were problems. She also learned him. The photograph on his study desk, his mother, young, dark-haired, standing behind the counter of a bakery in East Tower Mina with flour on her apron and a smile that hadn't yet learned what the world would cost her. The books on his shelf, not strategy manuals or financial reports, but poetry. Sicilian poets, Quasimodo, Buffalino, men who wrote about an island that was beautiful and brutal in equal measure. She learned that he ate alone, always. That he listened to opera in the evenings but turned it off when anyone entered the room. Like being caught with beauty was a weakness he couldn't afford. That he checked on Bettina's arthritis every morning without being asked, and had been quietly funding her grandson's football academy for 3 years without telling anyone. She learned that when he looked at her, which was happening more often now, and for longer, his eyes carried something she recognized from her own mirror. The exhaustion of performing strength so consistently that you forget what it feels like to set it down. On the 4th evening, Giada cooked for him. Not restaurant food, Lucia's food. Caponata made from the recipe book she'd had Marcello's men retrieve from her apartment along with 3 changes of clothes and Elena's tuition paperwork. She served it at the small kitchen table. 2 plates, no formality. Marcello tasted it, set down his fork. Was quiet long enough for Giada to wonder if something was wrong. "My mother made caponata," he said finally, "every Sunday. The bakery closed at noon and she'd spend the afternoon cooking for the neighborhood. Anyone who was hungry. Anyone who needed to sit somewhere and feel like they belonged." He looked at the plate. "She died when I was 19. I haven't tasted anything close to hers since." "Until now?" He met her eyes. "Until now." Something passed between them across that table that neither tried to name. The same charge that had lived in the kiss on the terrace, but slower now, quieter, not desperate, just true. The next morning, Marcello left for the council meeting. Giada stood in the courtyard watching the convoy of black cars descend the cliff road toward Palermo. Bettina appeared beside her with espresso. "He told his men to guard you with their lives," Bettina said. "In 30 years of working for this family, I have never heard him say that about anyone who wasn't blood." Giada sipped the espresso and said nothing, but her hand was steady for the first time since the terrace. And somewhere beneath the fear and the uncertainty and the absurdity of a waitress standing in a Don's courtyard wearing his cook's borrowed dress, something was growing. Something that felt less like falling and more like arriving. That evening her phone rang. Marcello's voice. Low, controlled, carrying an edge she hadn't heard before. The council ruled. The Ferretti family has been stripped of every territorial agreement on the island. Renata has been given 48 hours to leave Sicily permanently. Giada exhaled. "It's over?" A pause, then, "There's something else. Something I need to show you when I return. Not about Renata, about your grandmother's trattoria." "What about it?" "Come to my study when I'm back. I'll explain everything." The line went dead. Giada stood in the courtyard with the phone still pressed to her ear, and the Mediterranean stretching endless below, and the feeling that whatever Marcello was about to show her would change the shape of her life for the second time in a week. Marcello returned after midnight. Giada heard the convoy from her window, headlights cutting through darkness as the cars climbed the cliff road. She was already dressed, already waiting. Sleep hadn't been an option since the phone call. She found him in the study. He stood behind his desk with a folder open and an expression she hadn't seen before. Not calculated, not guarded, Something closer to the way he'd looked when he tasted Lucia's caponata, like he'd found something he thought no longer existed. "Sit down," he said. Giada sat. He slid the folder across the desk. Inside were documents, property records, financial statements, municipal filings. It took her a moment to recognize the address. Then her breath stopped. Via dei Normanni, the old quarter, her grandmother's trattoria. "When your grandmother died, the debts on the property were purchased by a holding company," Marcello said. "Standard practice. Medical debt gets bundled, sold, resold. The trattoria's debt changed hands 3 times in 2 years." Giada nodded. She knew this. She tried to trace it once and hit a wall of corporate names that meant nothing. "The holding company that currently owns your grandmother's debt is called Colonna Capital Partners." The name hit her like a hand to the chest. Colonna, Renata's family. "They bought it 14 months ago," Marcello continued. "Right around the time Renata and I got engaged. They've been sitting on it, not collecting, not foreclosing, just holding." "Why?" "Because the trattoria shares a wall with the building next door, which shares a foundation with the municipal water access point for the entire old quarter. Whoever controls that property controls the infrastructure access for a development project the Colonna family has been quietly pushing through Palermo's planning commission." He paused. "A project worth 40 million euros. Your grandmother's trattoria isn't debt to them. It's a keystone." Giada stared at the documents. The numbers blurred. 14 months. Renata's family had been holding Lucia's legacy hostage, not as a financial asset, but as a puzzle piece in a development deal that would gut the old quarter and replace it with luxury apartments and tourist hotels. Every cobblestone street, every family business, every neighborhood that had survived centuries of invasion and poverty and neglect, erased for profit. "There's more," Marcello said quietly. He turned to the second page. "The development requires municipal approval. 3 commissioners needed to sign off. 2 already have, both with financial ties to the Colonna family. The third refused, a woman named Dottoressa Ferrara." Giada's hands went cold. "That's my aunt, my mother's sister. She's been blocking the project for 8 months, refused every offer, every pressure, every threat." He looked at her. "Which is why the Ferretti family was brought in. The Colonnas needed muscle the political system couldn't provide. Renata's engagement to me wasn't just about accessing my operations. It was about removing me as a potential obstacle to the development. If I died, my organization's influence over Taormina's infrastructure would fracture. The Colonnas and Ferrettis would fill the vacuum. Your aunt would lose her last line of protection." Everything connected. The engagement, the poison, the silver-haired Ferretti handler, Renata's family holding Lucia's debt, her aunt blocking the commission vote. A conspiracy that stretched from a cliffside terrace to the foundations of the neighborhood where Giada grew up. "The council's ruling against the Ferretti family collapsed their partnership with the Colonnas," Marcello said. "Without Ferretti muscle, the development has no enforcement. Without Renata inside my organization, they have no intelligence. And without the third commissioner's vote, they have no approval." He closed the folder. "Your grandmother's debt has been transferred to my attorneys. As of this morning, it's been discharged. Fully. The trattoria is yours." Giada couldn't speak. Her vision blurred and she let it because some things deserved tears, and the sound of Lucia's name connected to the word free was one of them. "You didn't have to do this," she managed. "Your grandmother fed a neighborhood for 40 years. The Colonnas wanted to turn it into a parking garage." His jaw tightened. "I know which legacy deserves to survive." The weeks that followed moved like a tide, steady and irreversible. Renata left Sicily on a ferry to Naples with 2 suitcases and the expression of a woman who had gambled everything on betrayal and lost the table she was sitting at. The Colonna family's development project collapsed. Giada's aunt cast the vote that buried it permanently. The old quarter survived. Giada reopened the trattoria, not renovated, restored. The same wood-fired oven Lucia had used for 4 decades, the same copper pots, the recipe book open on its stand near the stove. She scrubbed the floors herself, repainted the walls the same sun-faded yellow they'd been when she was a child sitting on the counter watching her grandmother turn tomatoes and basil into something that made strangers feel like family. The sign above the door read, Lucia's. Marcello helped with the restoration, not with money, with hands. He showed up the first morning in work clothes and spent weeks alongside the crew, sanding floors and rehinging doors. His security stood outside looking bewildered. The most powerful man in Sicily was installing shelving and learning from Giada's uncle how to season cast iron properly. He did it without performance, without announcement. Like this was the version of himself he'd been waiting for permission to become. Elena helped on weekends between exams. She argued about portion sizes and played music too loud and tasted everything twice. Giada considered these the most beautiful sounds in her life. Opening night, 12 tables, every seat filled. Neighbors, Lucia's old customers, the fisherman who'd been delivering bronzino to this kitchen for 30 years. The smell of slow-cooked tomatoes and fresh basil drifted through open windows and down the cobblestone street exactly the way it used to when Lucia was alive. Marcello sat at the corner table. The controlled stillness that had defined him for years was different now. Not gone, but redirected. He'd restructured, stepped away from the parts of his world that required the man he no longer wanted to be. Still respected, still powerful, but choosing what to build instead of what to control. Giada brought him caponata, sat across from him. "You know when I knew?" she said. He looked up. Not the terrace, not the kiss, not any of the chaos. When? Third week of restoration. You were on your knees fixing the baseboard, plaster dust in your hair. Elena handed you espresso and you said thank you, like she'd given you something important. She paused. My grandmother always said you learn who a man is when he thinks the moment is too small to matter. That moment was small, and you were exactly who I hoped you'd be. Marcello reached across the table and took her hand. She held on the way a woman holds on when she's found something that doesn't ask her to be less than what she is. He kissed her. In a 12-table trattoria that smelled like Lucia's kitchen and sounded like the life Giada had been too afraid to believe she deserved. No poison, no betrayal, no performance. Just a man and a woman who found each other across a terrace that should have kept them invisible to one another, and chose to stay. Outside, the Mediterranean held the last light of evening, cobblestones still warm from the day. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor was singing, off-key, happy, unaware that anyone was listening. In a rented flat in Naples, Renata Colonna sat watching the evening news. The anchor smiled. A beloved landmark has returned to life in Taormina's historic quarter. Lucia's, named for the legendary cook who fed the neighborhood for 40 years, reopened tonight under the ownership of her granddaughter, Giada Ferrara. The camera panned to Giada behind the counter, flour on her apron, Marcello beside her, both smiling the way people smile when they've survived something together and come out holding hands on the other side. Renata turned off the television and lived with what she'd lost because she mistook a waitress for nobody and a good man for something she could discard. She kissed him to save his life. 3 words whispered against his lips rewrote everything. They thought she was crazy. They thought she was invisible. They thought a waitress from Taormina couldn't possibly matter. She mattered more than anyone sitting at that table, and the man whose life she saved spent the rest of his making sure she never doubted hers again. If you made it this far, you felt something, and we both know it. Hits remind you that the people the world overlooks are usually and tell us, what would you name your trattoria? Share this with someone who needs to hear it. We read every single one.